variety of meteorological and biological processes. Yes, rainwater, irrigation water, as long as that soil can absorb the moisture and it goes and enters down into the soil, it will carry things down. But guess what? When that soil is very low on organic carbon, most of that water wants to sit at the top or run off. And there are also very important mechanisms that transport that carbon down that are biological. The things we'll talk about in a moment.
Could I just underline the fact that Doug is recording this? So Ray's presentation will be linked on the SOCAN website shortly.
Okay, one more question and then I'll start again.
You have a picture of cows in the diverse environment. Cows have gotten a pretty bad rap lately. Can you explain that?
Yes, I'm a former 4-H leader, large club leader, which means our kids had cows, pigs, sheep, blah, blah, blah. I know exactly where you're coming from. Cows get a bad rap because when they poop or when they belch, out comes methane. That's the basis for their bad rap. And I think it's, in some respect, justifiable. But there's also the other side of the story, and I'm also going to come to that in some future slides that will give you another perspective on the outlook of cattle.
Water per ounce of protein with beef?
Not a good scenario unless you have an organic soil that can maintain its water holding capacity in a pasture setting. I'll come to that too, California. Thought you might want to see what the heck a humic acid molecule looks like and why it's so important. It's very complex. All the ring compounds that are attached together make it complex, even though there are some goodies in it like a sugar molecule, amino acid molecules that ordinarily bacteria would just love to jump on. But because of all these ring structures, they can't be touched by either fungi or bacteria, except very, very slowly. And the other thing I want to tell you about, this molecule in mass, with others like itself, has a sponge-like property in the soil. And it absorbs and swells up when water comes at it. And that's the principal reason why soils with a lot of soil organic matter retain water longer periods of time due to the presence of large amounts of this. This is the black material that you saw in that slice in the soil in an earlier slide. And if you just look on the right here, this is a kind of soil called silt loam. Water holding capacity increases with the organic content, so this is increasing carbon content, organic carbon in the soil from left to right. And this is the amount of water that soil will hold. So if you have minimal organic matter, it might hold 0.16 units. And up to 5, you add 5 times the amount of carbon, and that soil will hold more than double the amount of water. So that's why what we're talking about tonight, soil organic carbon, for a different kind of a reason. We're talking climate change here. The California legislature is talking drought. And the reason why they're talking drought and how it ties in, they're talking about $50 million of research funding for University of California and other personnel, other scientists, to figure out how to optimize soil carbon sequestration. So there's a practical application of what we're talking about here tonight. Finally, here are the things that I referred to earlier. This is called the soil food web. And there's a life into the soil like there's a life we may know when we walk through a forest. Just as diverse, carries with it all the concepts and principles. If it's a healthy forest, it's a healthy life living in that forest. So we have bacteria and fungi in masses that I'm going to tell you in a moment what they are that you will hardly believe that are in a handful of soil or in an acre of soil. And the little bacteria and the fungi, are eaten by larger microbes, are eaten by very small worms, are eaten by earthworms. In turn, those are preyed upon by soil critters like pill bugs, spiders, millipedes, centipedes, etc., and on goes the cycle. And if you're adding chemicals to the soil, you're not going to have the right numbers and the right proportions of these kinds of critters in the soil, which means your soil is likely not going to be able to metabolize carbon when it comes along, let alone sequester it. Here's a very large magnification of some of the critters that are in the soil. And since I'm a bacteriologist, let's start right here with these yellowish curved things are all bacteria. And they are attached to the growing tip of a root of a plant. And you may see some threads, but that's not fungi. That's polysaccharide. It's glucose molecules all attached together that forms what we call a biofilm. So if you pull a root out of a plant and you ever notice any moisture or sliminess to it, that's what you're seeing. You are seeing a biological film or a biofilm of bacteria that are attached to the plant roots. And why is that good? Well, these are symbiotic bacteria, which means they benefit from this association with the plant, because a lot of the photosynthesis that occurs above the ground produces chemicals that go out the roots and feed these bacteria. In fact, 40% of what photosynthesis produces in the leaves, 40% can leak out the roots to feed the microbes. So it's important to have roots, healthy roots in the ground to sequester carbon. What does the plant get for all of this? Well, how about a laugh in a moment? Everything else that you see here, these are the nematodes, some fungi here, mites, and other things. They all feed upon each other and especially upon the bacteria. Bacteria are high in nitrogen, have all kinds of goodies and nutrients associated with them. And like all living forms on this planet, they poop. And guess what's in their poop?
Oxygen.
Digested bacteria, very high in nitrogen. Guess where that nitrogen goes? When there's moisture in the soil, it becomes soupy. And then the plants take it up. So plants can live off of the digestive remnants of bacteria that they grow, when the bacteria are there to grow in intimate contact with the roots. And thinking about the saying, you are what you eat, so we eat those plants, right? Guess what? You, I, all living critters on this planet depend upon bacteria for our well-being. When we poop, what do you think comes out? It's bacteria, digested bacteria. Same thing happens with a rabbit, with a cow, and on goes the list. We all depend upon a healthy, symbiotic relationship, not pathogens, not parasites, but healthy relationship with healthy bacteria. And if you're adding chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers, you're disturbing this process. And it makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to sequester that carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, put it down into the ground. That's why we need healthy soil populations. Quickly, I'll just say, this is a fungus attached to the roots of a pine seedling. Looks like Santa's beard. That's all microbial growth. It's called mycelium. And that fungus has increased the surface area of those roots thousands of times, so that little plant can gain access to minerals in the soil at an easier pace. The ratios and numbers of these soil organisms are crucial for soil health and productivity. Just two examples. Biomass of soil organisms. In a forest, maybe half a ton of bacteria and 2 tons of fungi per acre. You move over to a prairie grass, 13 tons, 26,000 pounds of bacteria attached to prairie grass roots in an acre of soil in a healthy system. So both the numbers need to be right and the ratios of the different components in that soil need to be right in order to have a healthy functioning ecosystem. So what do we do in agriculture? Changing my thrust here a little bit. Years under cultivation with the plow, loss of soil organic content, we lose carbon. We talked about that earlier. It was up as CO2. And this slide deserves, and the next one, just a couple of more seconds from us. Agriculture has done its best to, I believe, inadvertently reduce soil carbon. This is the year. Going up is carbon in the soil, and you can see the prairies in the early 20s and 30s had about 25 tons of carbon per acre until the plow met the soil. And then the carbon was kicked out, down, to about half of the level where it used to be in the 1920s and 1930s. Where do you think that carbon went?
In the air.
Not in the soil anymore. Where did it go?
Yeah, it was like,
Hey, it's above our head. Right here in this little, it looks like, oh, things are being corrected. Very misleading part of this graph. It looked, yes, soil can be put back, carbon can be put back into the soil through conservation or no-tilling. In other words, the crop is grown, it's harvested, the residue stays on the top of the ground. The next year, the farmer plants seed right down into the soil through that residue, no plowing whatsoever. And that increases the carbon content of the soil because what sits on the top of the grass eventually gets down, what sits on top of the soil eventually gets down into the soil. But as good as this is, and you think, aha, we're making a comeback, this is not for all our soils. This is maybe for organic farmers is what's happening, and maybe for 25% of the commercial farmers. They're doing a no-till. Okay, here's a number exercise, moving quickly. This tells us that cropland in the United States was 450 million acres. It's about 400 million now. And we know that there's been about a 12-ton of carbon loss over 60 years. 400 million acres is a total of 5 gigaton loss of carbon as carbon dioxide just from U.S. soils. The world soils from world crop acreage, there's about 41 gigaton of carbon loss over that period of time. So far, so good. Follow that. We've lost a lot of carbon from our soil. The best I could estimate, and I asked Alan for this, and there's no apparent magic equation. I want to say that there is approximately 300 gigatons of carbon that went up into the atmosphere over the last 60 years. And I'm not talking about, don't worry about it went in this pool or that pool. I'm just saying it went up for now, about 300. And I'm speculating that of that 341 came from the world's croplands, or about 14%. About 5 years ago, scientists at the University of Maryland said, wait a minute, we're getting some positive feedback here in a bad way, where the soils are leaking more carbon dioxide than we had in the past because they're warming up and speeding up the processes, the metabolic processes of all of this bacteria. And we think in 20 years, 98 gigatons has come out having nothing to do with the plow, but just the metabolic activity and rate of these bacteria popped up. If that's a correct number, and the 41 is a correct number, it looks like of the 300 gigatons that come out, 139 or 45% could come from the soil. And even if this is off by 50%, the University of Maryland figure, it's still about 30% of the carbon above us has come out of the soil. Okay, you can't read this. I know you can't read it. I'll do a couple of things. I just wanted to say there's a lot of literature published that shows specifically what happens to the things in the soil when they're exposed to insecticides, herbicides, fertilizer, and other kinds of chemicals. And in my heart, I can't skip telling you that paraquat and glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, alters the activity at which impacts the rate in which plant material is digested. That's just two examples, paraquat, glyphosate. There are many, many other examples of what happens. God, what happens when we don't treat our soils and our land, our grasslands well? They erode, up goes more carbon. Intensive grazing, there was a question earlier about cows. Okay. This is a grazing land, grassland in Zimbabwe in 2006. That tree here with the red circle is the same as this tree here. My God, what happened in 2009? And you might think, oh, we just fertilized the hell out of it, right? no fertilizer whatsoever. So in this soil here, there's virtually no organic carbon. Nothing is growing. The water either sits on the surface or runs off. And it was just grazed to death. So the scientists said, let's bring in a large number of cattle for 1 or 2 days from an area where there is grass. So we brought them in. They pooped on the ground. There were some viable seeds in the poop. The hoof planted the seed with the organic matter from the poop associated with it, and 3 years later, this is what it looked like. So it isn't saying cows are bad. It's saying that humans mismanaged the cattle range. So we can come back with cattle now, and 3 years later, with very large numbers of animals, but only keep them on the land for 2 or 3 days and move them to another paddock. That's sequestering carbon here to here.
Is that 2 or 3 days every?
Sorry?
Is that 2 or 3 days a month, a year, every week?
It will depend on all of the conditions that you know affect that. But at any one time, it's 2 or 3 days, and they will eventually be able to cycle back when the growth is looking like this. Second one from the right. So if you eat grass down on the top, you have no roots. When you have no roots, you have very little organic matter. When you have very little organic matter, you don't have any soil food web. And you are not sequestering carbon. It's as simple as that. That's for grasslands. What happens to croplands? Croplands, organic. By God, that's organic farming. That's what we call it. Something that's been going on probably for thousands of years by the human population. Organic farming. It wasn't until the 1930s that we hit the soil with the plow. So, based on a 30-year study done at Rodale, we find that the yields from conventional pesticide-laden fertilized soils, those crops yield about the same as the green. The green is organic farming. Energy input, organic farming necessitates about a 20% reduction, less energy input. Greenhouse gas output, conventional farming puts out about 30% more.
What's energy?
The units,
No, what do you consider energy?
joules, microjoules, millijoules, burning petroleum-based compounds, the cost of making chemicals and the energetic costs of making chemicals and the like. This is not just work that was done only in the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania, even in China. The Chinese realized if they could increase their soil organic carbon, they would see tremendous increases in the yields of their crops. And bottom line, fertilizers artificially replace the natural function of the soil food web when the soil organic carbon is low. So we better start sequestering. Finishing up, for climate change considerations, I'd like you to think about some data and a challenge. This is a global issue. How can we figure out what to do with regards to land availability and calculations? And let's put up one example, a hypothetical example. Let's say we wanted to sequester all of that number 4 out of the air, the 4 gigaton red number that I showed you early on. And we wanted to do that in a year. And we thought we could put a ton of carbon into an acre of soil. You know, we'd need 4 billion acres to sequester all of the carbon that's net produced in 1 year. You think you can do that? How many acres do we have to play with? Rangeland, pasture, croplands, we have roughly, let's call it 20 billion acres. So we need to experiment with 20% of the land. That's probably doable. Can we get 1 acre? Can we get 1 ton of carbon in an acre of land? Is that possible? That sounds like a lot. But by the numbers, You know that an acre of soil, 6 inches deep, weighs about 1,000 tons. If the soil organic matter is, say, let's 2%, that's not very good soil, but it's out there. That means it has already 12 tons of carbon equivalents. We want to add 1 ton. That's an 8% increase.
The RCC library will be closing in about 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. But remember, because about 80% of it goes out, we can't just add 1 ton. Got to add a multiplier of that 1 ton, because a lot of it is going to come out as CO2. And when we add this stuff, remember, please, the rest of the benefits. Organic carbon stimulates plant growth, stimulates the soil food web organisms, and changes carbon residues, we hope, into a form that's going to stay around. The second challenge, where is all this carbon coming from? We'll run out of manure, we'll run out of compost, but hey, any shredded woody material will work, even newspapers, and of course cover crops. Crops that are allowed to grow late fall, early winter, or early spring, and then maybe cut and top residue way down on the soil, and eventually the crops that we grow will make their way down. Okay, now we're just about done. The authors of this paper must have had fun. 24 authors published the paper 2 years ago. The title was What We Know We Don't Know, and there's more. We don't know what we don't know about carbon sequestration. And there were many countries mentioned in this paper. I'm picking on Australia because they have the poorest crop soils of any country in the world. Agricultural practice, let's say cropping to pasture. And they were able to sequester about 0.3 to 0.6 tons of carbon per year per hectare. So you divide that by 2, roughly, and you get acres. So that's not 1 ton. That's only about 0.15 to 0.3 tons of carbon. We need more. How do we get to a ton? Can we get to a ton? That's the third challenge. Then there were other studies called meta-analyses, published in 2002, 67 studies, 24, and so on. One of these studies, no-till compared to conventional, 4.9, there we go, tons per hectare, 2.5 tons of carbon per acre. And guess what? All they did to show that, they had to dig down 37 meters. That's 12 inches of soil. That's the key, right? The stuff doesn't always just stay at the top. Scientists, you got to dig a deeper hole and follow the path of all the carbon that you're trying to sequester. Not just the top 10 inches, as most of the studies were done. This is a study that was done at University of California at Berkeley. Scientist Ray Seidler, good credentials. She got a PhD from Yale. She shook this world upside down, and it even made it to the California legislature. She, in part, is responsible for that $50 million bill that's being considered to fund further research on carbon sequestration. What did she do? She went to the grasslands in California, in 2 locations, in the valley and at the coast, and dumped 70 tons of compost per hectare onto some soil. And then for 3 years, followed what happened. So on this square, let's look here on the left. This is the control. This is the experimental. The difference is about 8 to 9 tons per hectare, or 4 tons per acre, 2.5 tons per acre, 1.5 tons per acre. This was tremendous. No one had ever been able to show this much carbon sequestration before, but I'm sorry she's not here to defend herself, and I have to offer some critique of this work. Notice, first of all, it only went over 3 years. And most of it at the end of the 3rd year is gone, ready to go. It's up in the atmosphere. What depth did she study? It says 0 to 10. So she only looked at the fast turnover carbon in the soil. Did any of that get down deeper? We don't know, because that was not studied. What happened to the health of the soil food web? Don't know. And also the same experiment done here in the coastal grassland, no difference. My God, no difference here? Tremendous difference here. What is it that we have to learn about these two ecosystems? When will scientists be able to say, that soil over there can be very good for carbon sequestration. This one over here, don't waste your time, don't spend the compost or the manure or the cover crop. Let it go to another more productive site. So the 1 ton of carbon sequestration per acre, if we can get it done on 20% of the land crop mass, will sequester all of the net carbon that is being produced. Then last year, in fact, November, these guys, tell you, the glass is half empty with them. They said that carbon sequestration is not a wedge that could contribute increasingly to mitigating climate change. And it isn't that they didn't believe in the science. Guess what their hang-up is? And it sounded oh so familiar. Can we get governments involved to cooperate and fund research on a global scale to see if this is going to work? That's their big problem. And that's a lot of acreage. Where are we going to get the residue to put it out on a global level? My comeback is, look, cover crops can be done and grown in 1 season. Let's give it a try. My comeback is, the soil isn't going to fill up that quickly because scientists say it takes about 80 years to saturate the soils. So the glass is not half empty. The glass is an opportunity. The glass is full of opportunity in this research area. So, last slide, here's what I would summarize. At the top, obviously, croplands. Soil carbon sequestration can happen, as demonstrated in other places, including California. Soil organic carbon, through no-till, probably require almost yearly additions of carbon. And cover crops should be considered. But the vast majority of our agricultural ecosystems are unhealthy. They're actually emitting carbon dioxide to the air. They have low carbon in the soil, use high amounts of synthetic chemicals, typically are plowed and subject to erosion and flooding. And off goes the CO2. And then finally, for the world's remaining wetlands and forests, a potential double negative whammy. Hey, they have high carbon sequestration, both above ground and in the ground. But if we have to drain wetlands dry, and if we have to cut forests, and we don't cut it for lumber that can go into a building for maybe 50 or 100 years, if it's burned, then all of that carbon immediately is lost to the atmosphere. And if that forest is converted into croplands, it's going to go into this kind of cropland. So if we can do one thing tonight, one lesson, let's try to stop this conversion from this kind of land and promote this kind of farming, which we generally call organic farming. And we will have another leg to stand on besides cutting back on the burning of fossil fuels. We'll be in the business of carbon sequestration at the same time. Thanks for your attention. Of course.
I've got a 20-acre property, and part of it is just weeds, part of it is forest. And my concern about leaving the weeds is it's a fire hazard. So, like the fire department says, hey, if you can't clear 10 feet on each side and 13.5 feet vertical, we're not even going to come in there when your place is burning down.
Yeah.
But if I cut all the grass out, isn't that the negative for sequestration?
No. And the good news is,
Repeat the question.
okay, Selden was saying he has a 20-acre parcel, part of it's forest land and part of it's weediness. Sounds like my backyard. And the fire department says they will not come onto his property in an emergency unless he keeps the grass and the weeds under control. Two things I would say. Don't spray, don't use any chemicals, and if you don't already, when you mow or cut, leave it in place. I do not know of any fire department that issue when they would come in and give you a hard time because you left the stubble. All that I know of about the rules, it's something like it's got to be cut down below 5 or 6 inches in height. They don't say you got to remove the stubble. So leave the stubble, and that's organic matter for future years' carbon sequestration.
But doesn't the fact that I kill the plants by cutting down, cutting them back, that doesn't affect?
As long as they come back next year.
Okay, they'll certainly come back early in the spring, but they gotta get cut down in the spring.
It's not the most optimal kind of condition because it's like mine, it's dry land,
Yeah.
but they do grow until about this time of the year. Mow them down, let them rest, and then nature will take its course when the rains come next winter and spring.
Okay. Thank you.
On one of your graphs there, when there was a turn upward for the carbon in the soil, and was that about the time that the CRP came into the program? My parents